Welcome to the Peaceful Worldschooling Podcast, featuring your host, Angela Harders. We are committed to cultivating a peaceful world beginning right in our own hearts and homes. Together, we believe that the world is our biggest and best classroom, and the people and places in it are our greatest teachers. So I invite you to join me on the adventure of a lifetime, beginning with a conversation that can change the world. Hello, and welcome to today's episode of the Peaceful Worldschooling Podcast, where we are committed to cultivating a peaceful world beginning right in our own hearts and homes. I'm your host, Angela Harders. I am a special education teacher, the author of Gospel-Based Parenting and the Crunchy Kids series, and a proud world schooling mom to two awesome children, Sophia, who's 7, and Benjamin, who is 3. Today on the Peaceful Worldschooling Podcast, I have the privilege and honor of introducing you to an amazing mom, Bevin Clare. Bevin, thank you so much for joining us today as we have a conversation that can change the world.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. All right, so to get us started, can you share with us a little bit about you, your family, and your story?
Sure. So I am I'm a mom, and I'm also a professor at the Maryland University of Integrative Health, where I direct the Master's of Science in Clinical Herbal Medicine program. And so, for me, most of my professional life has always been around herbal medicine, nutrition. I'm also a nutritionist, and these areas of health and wellness. But I've also always been a world schooling, homeschooling mom. And more recently, I've been talking more about that than I have about the other pieces. So it's like my personal and professional lives are kind of merging a little bit in that way. They always have naturally from my side. And I have 2 kids. I have Alexander, who's 11, and Cassia, who is 8.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I would love to hear more about what inspired you to start homeschooling.
Well, I've always been a traveler. I mean, my whole life, I've always loved to travel. And I think it was one of those things. Before you become a parent, there's all these people that will be like, well, you'll find out, or once you're a parent, and they say these things. And I think for the most part, they're right. They're like, the days go so fast, or it goes so quickly or something. And you're like, no way. And then, wow, you look back and it went quickly. But then there's certain things that people say, it's going to be this way or that way. And you're like, no, it's not. And for me, people always said, oh, well, I hope you get the travel out of your system before you have kids. And, you won't be able to travel anymore with little ones. And I was like, that is not going to be my situation. I'm going to, in fact, before my son, who was my first, was born, we bought a plane ticket to Vietnam. And I was like, I don't know what it's going to be like to be a mom, but I've already got this plane ticket, so he's coming with me. So I've really always wanted to do that. And that's always gone really well. And that freedom and flexibility of approach and ability to just have my kid outside and experiencing the world and active learning and so on. And when it was preschool time, because I've always worked, it was so hard to find a preschool that fit what I wanted to do. I mean, I kept going to these places where everyone was so nice, but I was like, so they'd just be in here all day, like just doing, they're like, oh, they can learn this and that. And I'm like, oh, I know, and then I finally went to a preschool that had like cubbies of really muddy boots and clothes. And as soon as I walked in, I was like, oh yeah, this is the place I want to go. I was at a farm and so on. So then it was, kindergarten time. And when I went, I just kept asking them questions of like, how much can I miss? No, I mean, like really, before I get in like legal trouble, how many days can I keep my kid out of school? And like, what happens if I do more than that? And I mean, I just went on. And the principal of the school was like, do you really want to be that person? I mean, they were like, school is like, it's a community. Like you're either in or you're out. And it's nobody's going to like it if you're like just trying to get out of it all the time. If you thought about homeschooling, and I had, but that was really, to me, I was like, yeah, this person's really right. If we're going to do school, I want to be part of that. Like I want to be in the community and active and have my kids feel like this is a place we're really invested in. And I wasn't. So, so the natural thing was, okay, well, homeschool. So we've homeschooled from the beginning.
Wow, that is amazing. I love that you love to travel and that you were able to really confront a lot of those misconceptions that people have about like, oh, once you have kids, you'll kind of have to put that your own love of traveling, you'll have to put that aside. Mm-hmm. And I love that you're really committed to not just creating travel opportunities for yourself, but also creating a love of travel with your children too. And that's been something that's been really important to me. Of course, due to COVID, we haven't been able to travel as much as I would like, or as I would hope that we could. But growing up, my parents, we would always go on a family vacation every year, and we would have we would usually take like 1 or 2 weeks that we would go somewhere in the world, like we would go to Europe or Hawaii. One year we went to Guatemala. That was my pick. Going to a third world country. That was my passion. And then, of course, as I got to be a high schooler, I started traveling more. I'm wondering, what did travel look like for you when you were growing up? Like, did your parents also take you on trips? Is that kind of where your love of travel started? Or how did your passion for traveling the world begin?
Yeah, so I think it did start. It started when I was a kid, and it started when I think it started when my mom stayed home when we were little and got involved in like a, multi-level marketing, cosmetics kind of thing, and could win these trips. So she started winning these trips because they hadn't traveled at all. And we didn't have much money, and there was definitely no travel budget. But she started winning these trips and going on them with my dad, and then I think they realized, oh wow, there's some value to this. So then they would try to find like bargains and take us all. Like we go on. I mean, I don't even know if people do this. I guess they still do, but like go on like a charter flight and go to a resort for, in off season when it was really cheap or something. Yeah. So we did that. But I remember like every time we'd leave the resort, I'd be much more interested. I'd be like, oh, people live here, and oh, check it out. And so I think by the time I was like 11 or 12, I would, I don't know how old you are, but for me, like I would get the newspaper and I would go to the consolidator pages, because that's where you get deals. Like there was no, they were all consolidators, like in New York and places like that. And they'd have these little tiny ads and I was a kid. And I think long distance phone calls were free by then, I think, or they'd have 1-800 numbers or something. Yeah. So I would like pick places on the globe, and then I would call these people and I'd be like, I want to find out like a ticket. I want to get some prices for tickets to these different places, because there was no internet and travel agents were kind of expensive. And so I would just do this exhaustive amount of research and find super bargains to different places in the world, and then convince my parents, because they'd say like, oh, we can save up and go, here or there. And I'm like, but, it's cheaper if we go to Morocco or if we go to somewhere else. And then we all kind of got into it and became much more interested in travel. And so it's always just been a huge central part of my life. And in fact, if I wasn't attached to a spouse and kids who really liked having a home base, I wouldn't have a home base, but I, this is a group thing. So that's how it works.
That is awesome. How old were you when you started doing that? I'm sorry, I missed that part.
I was probably like 11 or 12 or something along
those lines. That's incredible. You were like quite the entrepreneur from a young age.
I was super into it. So it's not surprising that this has ended up continuing to be I mean, whenever people are like, oh, I like this Netflix show, or I do this or that, I'm like, I don't really do any of that. What I do is like, I mean, I do some of it, but like I research and plan travel. Like I read books about travel, and I look at, all different types of places to find great bargains. And, I'm always ready. And I married somebody specifically that was like, sure, whatever you want to do, dear, as far as travel goes. So I can be, just recently in the middle of the night, and I'm like on my little travel website because I can't sleep, and I'm looking at stuff. I found this awesome deal, and I like crawl over to my husband. And I'm like, do you mind if I go buy tickets to, blah, blah, blah. And he's just like, whatever you think, so off I go. And, it's like a formality. I just want to check. But But yeah, so that's kind of my life. It's
Oh my gosh.
there's great deals out there and you just have to look for them.
Okay. So I have to know, can you share some of your secrets? What are some of the resources that you use to help you find these awesome deals to help you and your family travel?
Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of them. I wish there was like a secret thing, but the first thing that I would say is that you need to be ready to jump. Like that's the big thing. Is like there's often deals. But then, because people are like, tell me there's a next time, like an amazing deal. And I'll ping a few friends that want to know. And they're like, oh wow, I'm super busy today, but like tomorrow I can take a look. And then I need to ask my partner or check in with my blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, no, this is probably going to be around for like a few hours. Like if you want to do
Yeah.
this, you got to be ready to just
Mhm.
jump on it. And I know that takes a lot for people, but also a lot of these things they're not next week or next month. They're like 6 or 8 months from away. And
Yeah.
so, you can do that. And, so that's the first thing I would say. The second thing is, there are like companies out there like Scott's Cheap Flights and Secret Flying. Those are two that I use. But I actually think that I've found more things fooling around with Google Flights. And
Mhm.
one of the things that I know we were going to talk about today is I have some courses under the kind of tagline "Ready to Roam," and I teach people how to plan travel, including how to find all these deals. Because a lot of the times, I've found more deals on my own than I have from websites and things. And oftentimes, when you get the ones on websites, you're like, "That's great, but it's not the right time period for me. Like, I don't want to go in January or something." So I find that there's actually, ways of using Google Flights if you know how to use it. So there's a whole section of the course that's just on, it's like many videos on how to just use Google Flights to find bargains. And there's some really good ways to do that. And you can end up with, fantastic, amazing things. But it does take a little bit of time, but it's worth it, a couple of minutes a day and you can keep an eye on it.
Yeah. Well, and I will make sure that I include the link for your course in the description. So in case anyone is interested in learning more about how to find these awesome deals and
Sure.
hopefully either continue or start, a travel bug in your family,
Mhm.
then I'll make sure that you have access to that. So check out the show notes so you can see that. One of the other things that you mentioned too, that I felt like I really resonated with was that you mentioned when you went on the trip with your family that, you went and you stayed in this resort, but it was when you left the resort that you were like, man, I really want to like get out there. I want to meet these people. I want to talk to these
Right.
people. And I could so relate to that because I feel like there's a real difference between traveling as a tourist
Mhm.
and traveling as a world schooler. And yeah, for me, when people travel as a tourist, they kind of do. They stay to those touristy locations or they stay in a resort, and they really are removed in a lot of senses from what real life is like for the people that are actually living in these countries around the world. And so that was something that was really unique for me, is that I didn't want to just go to those touristy locations, although they are fun,
Right.
and there's
Sure.
of course a lot to do, but I really saw a lot of value in getting to know the local people wherever you're traveling, and being
Mhm.
able to have that immersion experience where you're going and living with families, or kind of getting off the beaten path a little bit, and you know getting connected with the real life people that are in the places where you are. And so I'm wondering, do you prefer like the touristy stuff, or have you also had opportunities to kind of go more, in the local life, experiencing what the local people are living like? Do you like to do a balance of both? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, that's such a great topic because it's so true, right? We go to places, um, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to like go on a vacation, have everything be super taken care of. I mean, I think cruises are the classic thing where you can just like, I remember I've been on some like long boat rides, but not really cruises so much. And somebody once gave a review of one I was looking at, and they were like, it's so great because you can go experience a little bit of the culture. You can come back on the boat in the afternoon. You can have your American beer with your American conversation and your American food. And I was like, oh gosh, I don't want that. This is definitely not for me, this piece, but there's nothing wrong. So we do a mix of both. Like often when we land in a country, especially if like the travel is very long and overwhelming, we'll go straight to some place that's just like a nice pool or a nice beach and a nice comfortable hotel, a good breakfast, and like chill out. And that's great. And then I think the cool thing about immersing yourself in culture is that you can choose how much you want to do. So like if if that is comfortable for you to stay in a place like that, which is great because that's often is comfortable, you can spend all day out doing all sorts of things and connecting with people. And there's so much to do. I think with technology, we're able to immerse ourselves, and with children. I mean, children is just like create these opportunities. I mean, kids find other kids. Every child speaks the language of play. And so it doesn't matter where they are or what language they speak, they just suddenly start playing. And I love that too. And so, the other thing, and I talk a lot about this in the course, is like that because of technology, because of things like Google Maps, you can find out where locals like to go. I mean, Google Maps is not a tourism. I mean, there are lots of things about it for tourists, but actually it's mostly local things. So if you're looking for like parks that are fun or restaurants or anything like that are popular, it's all there. You just have to know how to find it. And then you can go to those same places. So yeah, I love, doing things that local people do and feeling like you're more in touch with what's happening. And then sometimes I like to go back to my bubble, and, I will say it also depends on where you're traveling too, because of course, in some countries, the socioeconomic difference between tourists and locals means that if you're at like tourist hotels and things, you won't be experiencing a lot of locals other than the staff and so on. But on other parts of the world, like Europe or places where there's less of a discrepancy between the socioeconomic status of the, so what people that'll be staying at hotels and things could also be locals, or not necessarily right there, but traveling around their own country. China is a great example of that, where there's a lot of Chinese tourists everywhere you go. And so even if you're at the most touristy things or the most touristy facilities, most people around you are still Chinese, so it still feels like you're doing something totally immersive and exotic, even though everyone is a tourist.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that before. That there are places where the local people are also kind of tourists in their own environment, and I think that's something really important to mention, because before the pandemic happened, I actually wrote a blog about this, about how to become a world schooler, and of course I wrote about the importance of travel and going to another country. And I know that for, most Americans, there are a lot of Americans that never leave the United States, that don't own a passport, that don't get to experience another country or another culture, which I do believe is really valuable. But I also wanted to emphasize the point that even if you don't have a passport, although I do think everyone, should get one and go for it, like make a trip somewhere in the world. Even if you don't, you can still be a world schooler in your own country, right where you live, even in your own backyard. Like you don't have to travel to these exotic places to be a world schooler and to learn from the place where you're living,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think about that because, so I think there's a lot of valuable things I think about travel for families and children and adults. But, one of the pieces is that if you're lucky enough to be comfortable and to raise children comfortably, then they're really pretty comfortable. And I think that one of the things that creates resilience in our life is discomfort. And I'm not talking about lack of safety. I'm talking about discomfort. I'm talking about feeling like maybe like you don't necessarily fit in, like this is a really new environment. You don't really understand how things work. You have to be flexible. I mean, everything is really different. And I think that type of that creates a resilient child. And again, we can do this in our own country. I know you and I both live in Maryland. There are parts of Maryland I've been to where if you just drop me down there, I'd be like, I'm in El Salvador, or I am in South Korea. I mean, it was just like there's places like this. And so, you can talk to people who live in a place that are like, yeah, I've never gone into that like Asian food store where there's the food court and all of that. I've never been there. And so that's even, a great place to start. And, you go in, you're like, I don't know what anything is. I don't know what I can eat. I don't know like how this works. Though even like that feeling as a traveler, I love it because I'm safe. There's nothing wrong, but I get this opportunity to like, expand my understanding and my familiarity with different things. And I also get my kids to feel comfortable in those places where we're all trying to figure out how things work and how different they are. You can do that close to home. It just takes getting out of your box a little bit.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. And I love the grocery store idea. I feel like that's such a practical way. Like food is such an important part of culture. And literally by going into these like international grocery stores, it is like stepping foot into another country and almost sometimes it feels like another world, and really, giving yourself the opportunity to feel uncomfortable, like you mentioned, and explore something new, and I think that's one of my favorite things about being a world schooler or an unschooler is that it's not just about my children, learning new things, but that, I, as a parent, I also get to learn new things and experience new things. And we just have the privilege of learning and experiencing those new things together, which I think is beautiful.
It is.
We love it. I would love to know what is your favorite country that you have traveled to?
Oh, that's so hard. I know. I mean, it's so hard because I love different countries for different things. And I feel like,
or your favorite few top.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like you put on like different, I mean, there's places where, you just really connect with, and you feel like they're just part of you. And then other places where they're like, it was all right. But, I think one of my favorite countries that I've been to, so I'll give two because one of them is really pretty inaccessible for our listeners. And so it feels a little elitist, but we just happen to be able to get there on a bargain, which is Rarotonga is in the Cook Islands. And it's a Melanesian island literally in the middle of nowhere. I mean, there's just nothing out there. But what's really cool about Rarotonga is that it has a pretty uniform population. You can't live there unless you're born in Rarotonga. You can go stay for a little bit, and they've never been colonized. So they have this incredibly intact culture. Like you go to the grocery store or something, and so all the women are kind of like so Moana was based on that group of islands. Like when you think of Moana, so all the women are like kind of like big breasted and big hipped, and they wear these colorful muumuus, and they wear fresh flower leis every day. Like you just go into the food store, you got to wear that beautiful flower lei. So they have the culture is just so palpable everywhere, and it's just shockingly beautiful. So I really love that. A little bit closer to home for a lot of people. And I love Mexico. I think Mexico is one of those crazy countries where all you have to do is like scratch the surface and get a little bit further away. We go almost every year. The pandemic has changed that a little bit for Mexico, but we go, we'll just fly into Cancun because it's super close and cheap for us. And then going into Merida and all of the Ruta Puc and the Ruta de Maya and all the ruins and those small Mayan towns and villages all over the Yucatan Peninsula are phenomenal. And you go to Cancun, you stay in a nice hotel, get situated, grab a rental car, and off you go. And it's just so culturally immersive and super fun. So I love that. And then I think a third place I will mention that I was really surprised that I didn't think I would like and really captured a place in my heart is Abu Dhabi. And that's, a lot of your listeners may not have thought about traveling to the Middle East, but we went during COVID and spent 6 months when we decided that the US wasn't the best place for us. And it really, it's so exotic, just the desert and the camels everywhere and the sand and the culture and incredibly, I've never felt anywhere so safe before. So, that was a place, so much interesting arts and and food. And so we really loved it there too. And it can often be affordable to get there from the US relative to other places.
Have you been to all those places with your children as well, or were those places you went kind of prior to having kids?
So my kids and I have been to, I try not to count up, but I was doing it recently because we were doing our global entry applications. But we've been to 40 countries, the kids and I together, and
40.
alone, I've been to a lot more than that. Yeah, it might be closer to 50 now. I'm not really sure. We just got back from a trip, but yeah, so they've traveled all over the world, the kids to every continent, but Antarctica. Yeah.
Maybe you'll have to add that one on your list once you check off all the other ones.
If somebody wants to give me a trip to Antarctica, we will hop on a boat anytime. But it sounds like a really exotic life, and we are really privileged to have any money to spend on travel, because we do. But we really, I really spend a lot of time looking for deals and making sure we keep it affordable. And it is, I often find I spend less money when I'm away than when I'm home. I always joke around, like going to Mexico in the winter, I probably can fund my whole trip on what I save on heating bills.
Wow.
Yeah, so because everything is so inexpensive if you're traveling in the right way. So
yeah, that is very, very true. There are definitely places in the world. I know, when we were in Guatemala, I mean, you can live very comfortably there for $500, $600 a month, and yeah. So it is, I mean, you definitely do have to be strategic about, where you're going, the time of year that you're going, the places that you're going while you're there, but it is definitely affordable. Like, you don't have to spend, $10,000 on a trip to go somewhere, $5,000, to go somewhere. You can definitely do it a lot more affordable than what most people would think.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I think you have to get into a different mode. Like, people have, home and work mode, and then they have like vacation mode, and you can't really totally go there because I mean, people will say to me all the time, they'll see me with the kids, we'll be like doing some math or something, or or whatever, and they'll be like, don't worry about it, you're on vacation. I'm like, well, actually, we're if we didn't do, like, if I ate in vacation mode all the time, that would be a problem, because we travel like 7 or 8 months of the year. So, so we just, there's a third mode, and that is like long-term travel. And that doesn't mean you can't do special things, but so one of the things we like to do is we tend to move around a little bit, but we'll stay somewhere really affordable for a little while, and then we'll go to somewhere that's more like splashy and nice for a little bit, and then we'll, and try to even it out. And so, just thinking about it, and it's good for the kids, they learn how to make those decisions as well. When I'm like, well, if we want to do that, then that probably means that over the next 2 days, then we need to make sure that we're, making our own food or something versus, but we can just, is that what everybody wants to do? And so we do sometimes.
That's really cool. I love that you include your children in the process of thinking through a lot of the financial aspects of your trip. And I'm sure that you're including them in other aspects as well. What are some ways that your children contribute to your traveling experience as a family?
Well, I think that they learn to interact with people in different places, and like a lot of homeschoolers, they like adults. I think that that's always one of the differences between homeschool and public school kids, is that homeschool kids are often really used to talking with adults. They are by necessity, very flexible around food and things like that. And I think one of the biggest ways that they contribute is, so I think when they're home, they're sheltered from a lot of like the adult things that happen in life. Like, they don't have to worry about some of the logistics, because they happen behind the scenes. But when we're traveling, they do need to deal with those things, and they need to deal with the consequences of them. I mean, travel, especially like during COVID, and especially when you're crossing a lot of international borders and stuff, or flights, like there is going to be complications, and there are going to be moments that things are not ideal. And so they have to deal with some kind of like adult things, stressful situations, but again, not safety stuff, and I love it when, like, I'm dealing with something and I'm getting stressed, and my 11-year-old can look at me and then look at his sister and go like, let's go over here and play so mommy can deal with this. Or sometimes he'll say, Mom, this is out of our control. So let's just have a good time. And I say that, but I like, there's times where I forget, where I'm like, what are we going to do about this and that? And of course he's right. It's like, there are times when it's just, I have no control over what's happening at that moment. Like, we can't get on that flight that we were supposed to. So everything is going to fall apart at the other end. And at that moment, there's nothing we can do. So like, we can either be miserable or we can have some fun. So we figure it out.
Yeah, fun is definitely the more fun choice in that situation, although I'm sure it can be very, very stressful, to feel like you're out of control in a lot of the things that are happening especially when you're abroad. That can be really challenging. What are some other challenges that you guys have faced as a world schooling family, and how did you overcome them?
Well, I think traveling during COVID has been really different and interesting, and it's made me appreciate a lot of what's going on. So we were traveling during COVID, and then it was time to come home. So we came home right as everything closed down. And I was like an animal in a cage. I was also just like, oh, I'm going to like bake stuff, and I'm going to just relax into being here and, settle in. And that worked. And then in the summer of 2020, last summer, I was like, so I have a master's in infectious disease. So I have a pretty good idea of what was going on. And I was like, things are not going to be pretty here in the fall and the winter, and we're going to be inside and it's going to be difficult. And I want to get out of here. So I just started doing a lot of research into and looking into what our options were. And of course, it was a whole new world. I mean, it used to be like you just buy a plane ticket. And unless you're like, I wonder if I want to go to Algeria, you don't have to check, like, am I allowed to? What tests do I have to have? I mean, none of that. So I learned a lot about that. And actually, one of the things I've done is I've created it's a totally free course on how to travel during COVID-19 that's on my website. And it's everything that I wish I knew before I started, like how to find out about all that. So I think that was one of the biggest challenges, and how to like keep my family safe, how to deal with the logistics and make sure that I was fully prepared for those things, how to not stress out about it too much. And then also how to be responsible. For me, that was a really important part of world schooling during the pandemic. I didn't want to like bring my family somewhere where we might potentially overload the healthcare situation or make other people vulnerable. So, all of those things came into play as we decided what would be the right thing to do at that moment.
Is there something, looking back over all these years that you've been a world schooling family, is there something that you wish that you would have done different?
I mean, I think anytime you make a decision that's unconventional for your kids, you question whether it's the right decision. I mean, I think that's just human. I think that there's 1,000,001 moments of affirmation where you're like, yes, this is the right thing. But then there's moments where, it's just a question of, wait, am I just being selfish because this is the life I want to live, or is this actually the best for my children?
Yeah.
So I think those moments happen all the time. It's last night we were at a Christmas tree lighting community like festival thing, and my daughter was watching some kids perform on the stage. And she looked at me and said, why don't I get to do that? And I was like, well, those kids are part of a dance company, and they like go to dance classes at, 3 times a week or something, and they practice. And this is, they're really invested in this. And she was like, well, I want to do that. And I'm like, okay, well, then let's talk about it. But the reality is that that those types of things are much harder to do. And does that mean, I mean, she does dance summer camp, like those are concentrated time periods, but there's always a trade-off, I mean, if you want to have really good friends, they can't be friends that you just hope to run into. You have to invest in your friendships. And so we've been lucky to find people that like us enough to tolerate our crazy schedule. And I like to think that we try to be really good friends when we're away, where I don't know about your friendships, but a lot of mine are actually through like Messenger and things like that. And we, stay in touch. And so that can happen anywhere. And we just make sure that we prioritize those things. So I think that, doing differently, we've learned to change some of those things as we would over the years. And so far, so good. No regrets, but there's always a, part of me questioning things for sure.
Yeah. I do have another question too. I know we're running short on time, but
I'm okay. You're fine. You're fine.
okay. I wanted to ask you also about we've talked a lot about world schooling, but I'm really curious about how you guys do the homeschooling piece. Do you have like a particular homeschooling style, or how does that look for you and your kids as far as them, learning while you're traveling around the world?
Yeah. It's so individual, but for us, so my husband and I are both academics, so we really we love learning. That's my number one goal is to produce kids who love to learn. And then to support them on what their path is and our path is. So I would say we're eclectic. My son has always, since he was just a baby, has shown so much interest in like science and engineering and mechanics. I remember I'd like take him to the aquarium or something, and I'd be, look at the fishies, and he'd be like, Mommy, the filter starts up there and the pipes are there. There's a valve there. And like, can we go see the pump room? And I'm like, no, did you see the fishy? And he's just like, so he's always shown a lot of interest in that. And my husband's a scientist. I'm like, this kid is bound for that. So for us, it's like sticking with math for him has been really important. So I would say in a nutshell, without getting too detailed, math and language arts are something we're like pretty conventional with. We try to do that pretty much every day. And so it doesn't take very long because it's over maybe 325 days a year or something that we try to do math and language arts. And then just about everything else happens naturally. Like they do some out-school courses that are interest. And then of course, like all of our social science and history and stuff like that happen as we go through the world with what they're interested in. And occasionally, like we're about to go on a trip for 3 months. And so sometimes I like that because I can think, okay, 3 months, what do we want to do for 3 months? And so sometimes I'll pick like a unit study that we're going to do for 3 months or a month, and pick 3 of them. And then it's kind of nice because it's such a break in routine, and just think, all right, well, while we're away for this month, we're going to do this every day. And so we do some critical thinking, we do some information literacy stuff as well. But I would say eclectic mostly. There's not, I would say for my older kid, we probably actively school for about an hour or so a day. And that's usually during meal times. Like we'll bring stuff over while we're sitting and eating somewhere or early in the mornings. And for my younger one, a little less than that. And that's enough for us to keep up with the things that we want to do.
That's awesome. I know a lot of people, when they first start thinking about homeschooling, a lot of them start with thinking they have to do school at home and kind of set up this like 9 to 3 schedule of half an hour of science and half an hour of math and half an hour of language arts. And I love being able to hear from real world homeschooling moms that, I feel like everyone that I talk to, they're like, no, homeschooling is not like that at all.
Right.
And it is definitely not like the virtual learning that we were doing during COVID, where the kids were like sitting on a computer for 6 hours a day. Like homeschooling is so much bigger than that, I feel like. And yeah, I think when parents can really begin to see all of life as learning, and we can kind of let go a little bit of our preconceived notions of what learning is or what it's supposed to look like, and we can really create something that works for us. And I think that's awesome that you found that as far as the formal schooling goes, that you're able to do that in an hour or less. And I think to a lot of parents that might be shocking, like, oh my gosh, you only do 1 hour a day, like, is that enough? How would you answer a parent who's worried, like, is an hour a day, is that enough?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a funny thing. So you say that. So yesterday, we actually only squeezed in about a half an hour. And I'm just thinking, so we got up, we actually went on a little field trip. There's a science group that we're part of. So we saw the largest geodynamic simulator at the University of Maryland. And then we had some time to kill. We went for a little walk. We went to a nature center, and they had all these different animals in habitats and cages that had been harmed in the wild. So we actually did a lot of like animal biology, probably. None of this is counting, right? And then
it all counts.
Exactly. Counts. And then they're playing, and and then we did some like paint your own pottery stuff with a friend. And so there's our art. So it's funny because like I think if I was to actually, I could be like, oh yes, we actually schooled yesterday for 7 hours. If I was to be like, oh yeah, there's the art and there's the PE and there's the health stuff that we did. But actually, I mean, it's hard to get my kids to sit in a chair, and to sit down and do something like math. Now, they also think it's really important. So that's the thing is when you ask them, do you want to stop doing this? And they're like, yes, no, they're like, I don't really want to do it, but I also know, I think it's really important for me to learn it. And I want you to get me to do it every day. So that's, that's where it is. And so we're clearly not unschoolers, but I think my kids realize that, yeah, there's certain investment that you put into your education in that way. And so they can choose what they're interested in. And so, that ends up, and that does mean sometimes us as parents being like, come on, we need to do this. This is our commitment. And so I think of it as exercise as a parent where, it's so easy to just let the day go by, but then I'm like, no, I need to do this. This is my commitment to myself to get off my butt, which I don't always manage to do.
Well, and that actually, you brought up a good point too, because I think a lot of people just assume that, unschoolers aren't using curriculum or aren't using doing formal learning or things like that. But, the way that your son was expressing himself, I felt like that really, resonated with me. And I guess what I imagine unschooling to look like, that there are times when it's like, this maybe not, maybe this isn't my favorite thing, or maybe I really don't want to, do this necessarily, but I see the value in it. And so I'm going to do it.
Right.
And that is a huge part of it, as unschoolers grow, we see that, okay, I know that if I want to go to college, I know that I have to pass, get a certain score on my SATs, or I have to take these other tests or whatever those other things are, pass these math entry exams or whatever. And so then they have a reason to do it. So even though, maybe if they were left on their own and they're like, maybe I'm not going to do calculus today,
right.
But because they have a reason to know calculus, whether that be getting into college or something else that's on that stepping stone to achieving what their personal goals are, then they have a reason to do it. And it does, they learn it so much faster, because even though they may not necessarily love it, they see the value in it. Just like your son said,
and I think they need parents to encourage them. I mean, I think it's the same thing around if you've tried to have your kids learn how to eat a balanced diet, that it's they need that. That's why one of the reasons we have parents, I think, is to help encourage. And it's, I find my kids, I try to give them a lot of autonomy, but my son will be like, I'm going to buy this. And I'm like, are you sure? Can we sit and talk about it for a minute? This is this much money. And this is how long it took you to make that. And, what do you think it'll be like in, a few months from now? Or do you want to wait 24 hours? So stuff like that. I'm not trying to stop him, but I also, sometimes it's I think we need that parents, that perspective around education and lifestyle and choices and all of that. And when, I, as a nutritionist, my kids are constantly exposed to that. And I remember when my little one day looked at me and she said, I know it's not good for my body, but I really want to eat it anyways. And I was like, awesome. That's, it's a totally different thing to be like, I'm just going to eat that because I think it is good for me, but it's really not, versus being like, I think this isn't the best choice for my body, but I want it. So then I choose. It's all about choice. And so it doesn't come down necessarily to choice in the very moment. When your kid says, I want to learn to type, you're like, well, you need to type every day then to learn to type. It comes down to, they say, I want to learn to type. And it's like, all right, does that mean every day I'm going to, try to encourage you to type or really put it on the list? And it's like, yeah, I need to do that. So then we do. Yeah. That's such a dance, isn't it? To make sure your kids feel like they have autonomy, but also the fortitude and perspective that parents can offer.
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing up that balance, because, we do, we can bring in another, perspective and being able to ask kind of those critical thinking questions. And I think it is that difference between coming down as this authoritarian, telling them what they're going to do or what they're not going to do, versus giving them that autonomy, but then also being there to provide that feedback and that input, and to ask them those deeper questions and encourage them to think about, some different things that maybe they hadn't considered before. It is a beautiful dance. I think that's brilliant. Brilliant the way that you put it is. It is a beautiful dance. And I think being able to, navigate that with our children and learn how to have that balance with them and supporting them in the things that they're wanting, like their true, goals and dreams, and not just like the fleeting moment of like, oh, I just want this right now, but
Right.
providing that, I think, is really valuable. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And actually, I like that you brought up typing too. I want to just kind of throw a plug in there too. If your children are interested in typing, I actually designed a typing course
Oh, cool.
for kids. So I was a reading teacher for a long time. And so I designed a typing course that teaches typing through phonics and spelling patterns. So I will make sure that I share the link in the notes for that. So in case anyone is interested in my reading and typing course, that's a great way that you can help supplement your kids' learning and then teach them a very valuable skill. Because I feel like being able to type nowadays is so important. And yeah, I mean, I save so much time in my life because I can type over 90 words per minute, as opposed to the average person that can only type 30 words per minute, or versus the average child that is typing between like 3 and 5 words per minute.
Right.
Pecking at it like that. So yeah, being able to, help offer, opportunities for our kids to learn these valuable life skills is a blessing.
That's great.
All right. So Bevin, thank you so much for joining me today on the Peaceful Worldschooling Podcast. And for everyone else that's listening, I want to thank you for joining us as we had this awesome conversation about world schooling and homeschooling and traveling and just life as parents. I hope that this episode has been as much of a blessing for you as it has been for me. Bevin, before we sign off today, I want to make sure that people have an opportunity to connect with you. What are ways that if someone's listening, they're like, hey, I want to, connect with Bevin and follow her on her journey. How can people do that?
So you can go to bevinclare.com. So that's BEVINCLARE. There's no I, which if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see it, .com. And you can find out about courses. You can see that free How to Travel in COVID-19 course, and then get on my newsletter, social media links, all of that. And I am happy to give a discount for those courses if your people are interested in being a traveler. It takes you all the way from choosing a destination in the world, figuring out your priorities. I show you my top like 30 or 40 destinations that I've really loved, and buying the best plane tickets and creating an itinerary that's really culturally rich that you can just do all by yourself and not have to go on a tour or anything like that. So I'll send a discount link along for your listeners. And thanks for having me on today.
Oh, thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure chatting with you. And so make sure that you check out the show notes. Everything will be there. All those awesome links that Bevin shared with us, and some of those other resources. Also, I'm going to make sure that I put those there so you can start your own world schooling journey and start planning out some awesome trips for you and your family. Please feel free to connect with either Bevin or me. We're more than happy to help you as you begin opening the horizons and expanding the horizons for yourself and for your children as you check out new places in the world. So thank you so much. Remember that there are new episodes of the podcast that are released every Tuesday. So make sure that you subscribe so you'll not miss out on a single one. And if you would like to support me and the work that I'm doing, please share this episode with your family and friends. And also feel free to check out my website, www.peacefulworldschoolers.com. Thank you so very much. And I hope that your day is as wonderful as you are. See you next Tuesday. Join us next Tuesday on the Peaceful Worldschooling Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Harders. And if you enjoyed today's episode, click subscribe and be sure to hit the bell so you will not miss out on a single episode. Today's episode of the Peaceful Worldschooling Podcast is brought to you by the Reading and Typing course, a revolutionary online typing program that teaches touch typing through spelling and phonics patterns. This program is perfect for children 6 and up, and it works great for adults too. So if you would like to sign up for the Reading and Typing course and learn how to save time, money, and stress by learning how to type quickly, just click the link below in the description or go to www.peacefulworldschoolers.com/downloads. Use the promo code PWP20 for a 20% discount.